under fluorescent lights and fake smiles. She was dragged from the first-class line like a thief. No questions, no scan, just a judgment based on her skin. The man behind her, White, said nothing. He walked straight through. She was forced to stand aside. But here's what no one knew. The woman they just humiliated doesn't just hold a boarding pass. She holds the power to shut down every flight on that screen. You didn't just profile a passenger. You provoked the architect of your future collapse. And now, while they scramble to reprint her seat, she's already printing something else. A clause buried deep in their funding contract. One that turns prejudice into bankruptcy. So ask yourself, who really didn't belong in that line? This is the story of a black woman erased in silence, and how she turned that silence into a system-wide reckoning. You won't believe who she really is, or what happens when she finally says 2 words, "It's time." Watch closely, comment where you're tuning in from, and subscribe, because the moment they tried to downgrade her, they triggered their own descent. At 6:32 a.m., Elise Warren stepped out of the black sedan with the quiet composure of someone who had spent more of her life in airports than in her own living room. Dressed in a midnight blue pantsuit and modest low heels, her appearance was elegant but intentionally neutral. Nothing about her screamed excess or demanded attention. That was the point. Elise had learned early that in rooms built for the powerful, it wasn't noise that carried weight. It was silence paired with certainty. She approached the sliding doors of Terminal B at Alderbrook International, a second-tier hub trying to play first class in a city where optics mattered. As the doors parted, a cold breeze from the inside swept against her face, followed by the familiar synthetic scent of filtered air, overpriced coffee, and polished tile. Elise inhaled deeply. Another flight, another boardroom, another continent. But this time, the flight wasn't just business. It was a summit she was funding herself. Still, she didn't act like it. The check-in queue was nearly empty, save for a few early travelers and a cluster of staff leaning against the counters with caffeine in hand and weekend fatigue in their eyes. Elise walked up to the first-class line with ease, her boarding pass already pulled up on her phone. The screen showed a bright 1A on her ticket. She had checked in online at midnight, just as her assistant always scheduled it. No room for error. She placed her phone on the counter in front of a woman wearing a tight bun and a Haven Air name tag that read Nancy. The woman didn't smile, didn't even look at the phone. She glanced up, registered Elise's skin tone, then, without a word, pointed toward the general boarding queue. "Economy line is to the left," she said, monotone. Elise didn't blink. "I'm flying first," she replied calmly, holding up the glowing screen again. Nancy finally looked down, then back up, still unmoved. "Economy is that way." The tone didn't shift. It wasn't laced with anger, just indifference. Institutional indifference. The kind you couldn't report, because it never quite said what it meant. Behind Elise, a tall white man in a tan blazer stepped forward, dragging a single duffel bag behind him. Nancy's posture shifted. She smiled. "Good morning, sir. First class." He nodded. "Great. Could I offer you a bottle of water while I print your tags?" Elise didn't move, didn't speak, just stepped slightly to the side. She wasn't interested in a scene. Not here, not yet. But as she waited for the man to finish, she noticed another attendant standing idly near a kiosk marked Premium Self-Check. Without comment, Elise walked over and scanned her phone. The machine printed her baggage tag and boarding pass instantly. Passenger Elise Warren. Seat 1A. Clear. Verified. Digital. Undeniable. With her documents in hand, she walked past the counter without another glance at Nancy. Not out of pride, out of discipline. Elise had spent her entire professional life controlling her reactions. That was how she won. But she took note of the exchange, cataloged it. Because, in Elise's world, no slight was ever just a mistake. Every dismissive gesture, every patronizing smile, every moment of erasure, it all added up. Especially here. Especially at home. The security lanes were wider than she remembered. New renovation probably. TSA pre-check on the right, general on the left. Elise moved toward the right lane. The man at the podium was young, early 20s, scanning quickly and speaking even faster. "Boarding pass," he said, without looking up. Elise handed him the printout and her ID. He paused, then tapped something on his tablet. "You've been flagged for additional screening," he said. "Random selection." Elise's brow lifted. "I have global entry and clear." He shrugged. System must have pulled it. Behind her, another passenger, blonde in yoga pants, wheeling a rose gold suitcase, walked through pre-check without being stopped. Then another. Then two men in polo shirts. Elise was guided to the left, toward general screening. Her bag was pulled, not for a weapon, not for liquids, but because the agent said he smelled something weird. Elise didn't flinch, didn't argue. She watched as the TSA agent opened her carry-on without gloves, flipped through a sealed envelope marked confidential, and made a quiet humph sound as if it meant something. When they were done, they handed her the bag with zero acknowledgement. She walked away wordlessly, and yet something stuck with her, not the inspection itself, but the way the agent had looked at her, like he expected her to react, like he was hoping for it. But Elise gave him nothing. Back in the main terminal, she stopped for a moment near a digital directory. Her flight to Zurich was still listed as on time. She didn't need to check. Her assistant already confirmed the crew manifest, seat chart, and dietary clearances. But still she paused. Not because she doubted the system, but because she had seen too many systems pretend to be neutral. And she knew, today something wasn't right. Not technically, not logistically, but atmospherically. It was in the air, and Elise Warren was never wrong about these things. As she approached the lounge entrance, she noted two employees chatting near the scanner. One glanced at her and said nothing. No greeting, no acknowledgement. Elise tapped her boarding pass on the reader. Read. The screen blinked. The employee leaned over. "Looks like you're not on the approved access list." Elise tilted her head slightly. "Check again." The woman tapped a few times, then shook her head. "Still not showing. You'll need to visit guest services." Elise reached into her coat pocket, retrieved her phone, and pulled up her receipt, $8, for $50 for her Zurich itinerary, inclusive of all first-class services. She held it up. The staff member hesitated, then overrode the system manually. "Must be a glitch," she muttered. Elise walked in without another word. Inside, the lounge was warm and quiet. Neutral jazz played under the hum of espresso machines. Elise sat by the window, watching as a line of planes taxied in the distance. The skyline reflected off the glass like a split screen. In one version, she was just a tired traveler trying to reach her next meeting. In the other, she was something the system didn't know how to classify. A woman out of place, not because she didn't belong, but because she did. And that's what threatened them. She didn't need validation, but she saw what they were doing. Because this wasn't about a boarding pass. It was about permission, about who gets to belong without question, and who must prove it every step of the way. The lounge hadn't calmed Elise's instincts. If anything, the silence had sharpened them. As she left its insulated space and made her way back into the main artery of the terminal, something felt misaligned. Not in a way the average traveler would notice, but in the micro-movements, the shifting gazes, the flickers of attention that disappeared the second you try to catch them. Elise walked toward the TSA pre-check lane again, boarding pass and ID in hand, her posture flawless, her pace unhurried. The agent manning the entry podium was different this time. Early 30s, buzz cut, tightly clipped name tag, J. Harper. He took her documents without looking up, scanned them, and paused. Then his eyes flicked up to meet hers for half a second, before shifting left to the earpiece, snug behind his cheek. "One moment," he said, the words too smooth, too rehearsed. Elise said nothing. Harper tapped twice on his tablet, then leaned slightly toward the other agent behind the line and whispered something. Elise couldn't catch the full sentence, but one phrase echoed just clearly enough to land. She might be an internal. The other agent nodded. Elise's expression remained still, but her chest tightened, not from fear, but from confirmation. This wasn't just casual oversight anymore. She had become a variable they were being coached on, a threat not because of what she'd done, but because of who she appeared to be. "Step over to lane 4, ma'am. We'll conduct a brief secondary screening," Harper announced suddenly, loud enough for the passengers in neighboring lanes to look up. Elise blinked once, then complied, dragging her carry-on behind her with the same grace as before, even as a few heads turned, assessing her not as a professional, not as a passenger, but as a problem in motion. At lane 4, 2 TSA agents, one male, one female, waited with latex gloves already on. "Random check," they said. Elise held out her arms, lips sealed. The wand hovered over her shoulders, waist, ankles. No beeps. Nothing unusual. Yet her carry-on was still taken. The male agent muttered something about unusual contents as he unzipped her bag without explanation. Elise kept watching calmly until he pulled out a gray envelope labeled with a barcode and seal from Federal Economic Board restricted briefing materials. He rotated it, holding it against the light like he was checking for counterfeit bills. "You work in finance?" he asked flatly. Elise answered with equal weight. "Something like that." "Important stuff?" he grinned. She didn't smile. "Enough to know that's not how you handle confidential documents." The female agent looked up briefly, but didn't intervene. The male agent placed the envelope back in the bag, now slightly bent. "You're good," he said. "Next." Elise zipped her carry-on herself, then walked away slowly, deliberately, absorbing every glance now orbiting around her. She wasn't a security concern. She had become a performance. Continuing toward her gate, Elise stopped at a kiosk near the corridor bend. She tapped the screen, pulled up her itinerary, and scanned her ID. Nothing happened. The screen flashed white, then red. "Error. QR code invalid. Please see agent." Elise narrowed her eyes. She tapped again, same result. The kiosk beside her was functioning fine. 2 other travelers breezed through with their printouts in seconds. She tried a third kiosk. Same result. Invalid QR code. Invalid traveler ID. It was impossible. She had already printed her documents this morning. She had already been cleared. She stared at the blinking red alert, and for the first time, allowed a trace of irritation to slip beneath her calm. She flagged an employee walking past, young, distracted, Haven Air badge dangling off a lanyard that looked too big for his frame. "Excuse me," she said. "This kiosk says my QR code is invalid." The employee glanced at her screen, then tilted his head like he'd seen something uncomfortable. "Yeah, that's weird," he muttered. "Let me grab someone." He walked off. Elise waited. A few seconds later, he returned with a woman in a navy jacket. Older, curt, high-ranking. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked. Elise explained again, voice measured. The woman tapped a code into the kiosk, pulled up Elise's profile, and visibly stiffened. There was something about the way her hand recoiled slightly from the screen, as if the system had told her something she wasn't expecting. "I'm afraid your profile's been marked for manual boarding," she said quickly. "You'll need to check in at the gate directly." "Marked by who?" Elise asked. The woman didn't answer. "What does manual boarding mean?" Still no answer. The woman turned to leave. Elise stood still for a moment, letting the words settle around her like a fog. She had been marked, not by glitch, not by chance, but by someone with enough access to make it look like protocol. She turned from a kiosk, scanning the terminal slowly. The seating areas, the coffee counters, the quiet phone calls in corners. One of these people had pulled that trigger. Not to stop her, not yet, but to reroute her, isolate her. She was no longer part of the digital flow. She had been diverted. Elise walked toward the concourse slowly, weaving past other travelers without touching a single soul. Every step was more certain than the last. They weren't protecting the system from her. They were protecting the system from being seen by her. Elise's steps were quieter now, but every movement was calculated. She approached gate A19 with the grace of a diplomat and the caution of a woman who had seen the inner workings of too many powerful systems to believe in coincidence. The boarding screen above the gate still displayed her flight to Zurich status, on time, seat, first class assigned. That last word carried weight now. She clutched her boarding pass between her fingers like it was a contract, one she was prepared to enforce. The gate attendant stood behind the counter, scrolling through a manifest that seemed to loop endlessly. Elise approached with a confident calm and presented her pass. "Boarding early?" the attendant asked, glancing at the screen, then frowning. "Hold on, this seat's marked unavailable." Elise blinked. "Unavailable how?" "Flag for technical issue," he replied, tapping twice more. "One as currently blocked. Electrical recline failure," they said. "Who marked that?" Elise asked. "I didn't receive any notice." The attendant shrugged. "It's in the report for maintenance. We're trying to reassign." "No," Elise cut in. Her voice didn't rise, but it thickened with precision. "I'm not here for a reassignment. I paid for 1A, and I was confirmed. What other seat do you have in first?" He glanced nervously at his screen. "Let me check." Before he could finish, a second passenger, mid-40s, tall, wearing a casual blazer and holding a leather duffel, stepped forward. "Excuse me," the man said, "I believe I'm 1A. Got this pass printed just now." Elise turned slightly, watching as the gate agent's face drained. "Sir, I thought that seat was—" "They cleared it," the man said, handing over his boarding pass with the certainty of someone who had never been challenged at an airport in his life. The attendant scanned it. Green light. Boarding accepted. No alert. Elise's jaw remained still, but her breath slowed. "You just told me it was blocked for a technical issue," she said. "Yes, but maybe they fixed it," he stammered. "It wasn't showing clear earlier." Elise didn't respond. She simply looked down at the pass still in her hand, then up at the man who had just walked onto the jet bridge without a single question asked. 1A, her seat. No longer hers. She turned away slowly, pivoting toward the service desk near the lounge corridor. If something had shifted, she needed to confirm it. But more importantly, she needed to know who had orchestrated it. Elise arrived at the premium support counter and was met by a younger employee with a polished nameplate and perfect posture. "How can I help you?" she asked. Elise handed over her itinerary and said, "I need to confirm my access privileges and seat assignment. There appears to have been a reclassification." The woman typed briskly, then paused. Her brows knitted, lips pressing into a thin line. "It looks like your profile was modified this morning." "Modified by who?" Elise asked. "Internal operations," the woman answered. "There's a note here. Service package update. Downgrade to Tier B." Elise narrowed her eyes. "There was no update. My ticket is locked. Paid in full. Same tier since purchase." "I understand, but sometimes systems recalibrate based on back-end package bundles, promotional triggers, flight thresholds, loyalty algorithms," the woman recited, as if reading a manual designed to deflect blame. Elise leaned forward. "That's not a recalibration. That's a removal." The employee didn't deny it. "You'll have to contact guest relations to request restoration." "No," Elise said, voice now steel. "You're going to tell me who has the clearance to make changes like this, who has the ability to overwrite a locked first-class status without consent." "That's above my access level," the woman replied. "But you've been moved to main cabin standby." Elise's breath held still for half a beat. "Standby." "Technically, yes," she said. "Your original seat is void. We can offer compensation." "I don't want compensation," Elise said. "I want documentation." The woman flinched slightly, but began printing a summary of the changes. Elise took it without a word and turned. She walked back toward the lounge, a slow simmer beneath her skin. At the lounge entrance, a man in a tailored vest blocked her path gently. "Name, please." "Elise Warren." He tapped, frowned, then tapped again. "Strange," he said. "You're not showing up in today's access list." "Check again," she said. He did. No result. Elise pulled out her receipt again, time-stamped and verified. He glanced, hesitated, then waved over his manager. The manager looked at the receipt, then the system, then at Elise. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Your package tier has been downgraded. Lounge access is no longer included." Elise inhaled slowly. "At what point was that changed?" "At 6:07 this morning," he said. Elise looked down at her phone. 6:07. That was exactly when she'd entered the airport. Not before. Not after. The moment she'd crossed the threshold, someone had triggered the reset. Elise stepped back. She wasn't going to argue in the open. Not here. Not yet. But the evidence was mounting. Every action had a signature. Every system edit left a trail. She knew how these infrastructures were built. She'd consulted on more than one. Every locked fare class had override protocols. Every override was time-stamped. Every timestamp had an origin ID. She just needed the right access point. For now, she walked toward the main concourse, passing rows of travelers who had no idea they were watching a woman being erased in real time. Her rights weren't being suspended because of an error. They were being surgically extracted piece by piece, hidden behind words like adjustment, system logic, recalibration. But Elise knew better. She always had. Because if you wanted to strip someone of power quietly, you didn't need to break the law. You just needed to exploit policy. And as she neared the automated doors leading to the central atrium, she felt the next shift coming. Not from the gate, not from the counter, but from the screen that flickered ahead. Elise crossed the atrium with a precision that masked the slow corrosion building beneath her comm. The terminal buzzed around her with practiced indifference. Boarding calls over loudspeakers, footsteps bouncing off polished tile. The distant whir of escalators, ferrying people who didn't realize they were gliding through a system far more political than mechanical. Her phone buzzed once in her coat pocket. A confirmation from her Zurich contact. Her itinerary, hotel, and driver were all still on schedule. But those were systems outside this one, systems she controlled. Here, on this side of the gate, she was becoming increasingly invisible by design. The closer she got to power, the more the structure seemed to misplace her on purpose. She veered into the duty-free corridor, more out of habit than desire. Rows of glass cabinets reflected her back at every angle, tall, composed, professional. But today her image felt thinner, as if the mirrors themselves weren't convinced she belonged. Elise walked toward the electronics section. She had been meaning to replace her travel headphones, and a new model sat gleaming in a backlit display labeled, "For our most distinguished travelers." She selected the box, stepped to the counter, and offered her Haven Air Elite Access card. The one reserved for strategic investors, the one the brand sent directly to her office with a note that said, "Thank you for believing in our skies." The clerk, a young man with a badge that read Tyler, scanned the card, then blinked at the screen. That's strange," he murmured. "System says this card's been temporarily frozen. Do you have another form of payment?" Elise tilted her head slightly. "Temporarily frozen?" "Yeah," he said, turning the screen toward her. "See? Flagged for irregular activity. Transaction declined." Elise's gaze remained fixed. "What activity?" Tyler shrugged. "I don't have access to those details." "Then call someone who does." Her voice never rose, but the weight in it made Tyler pause. He tapped the terminal again, dialed an internal line, spoke in low tones. Elise waited. Finally, he returned. "They said the freeze is due to a tier misalignment in the back end." "Whatever that means." Elise exhaled through her nose, barely. "That card was issued directly by your executive relations team. It is not based on tier. It is based on ownership." Tyler stepped back slightly. "I'm just going off what the screen says." Elise looked at the message one last time. "Card not recognized access, suspended pending review," then returned the headphones to the shelf. She walked away slowly, her posture unchanged, but inside something split. It wasn't about the card. It was about the suggestion beneath it. "You don't qualify. Not anymore." Further down the concourse, she stopped at a cafe counter for a bottle of water. "Can I use the same card here?" she asked. The barista scanned it. "Says invalid." Elise offered a different corporate card. It cleared instantly. So it wasn't about her funds. It was about her flag. Someone had tagged her profile, quietly severing the tools that tied her to status, shrinking her world transaction by transaction. She didn't need the card to buy water. She needed it to see who was watching her use it. She moved next toward the upper deck lounge, one of the premium zones reserved for international first-class travelers. The entrance display rotated between flight schedules and welcome, esteemed guests' messages. Elise scanned the list, a digital scroll of names meant to flatter and affirm. D. Marks. S. Levine. A. Thorne. Every name crisp, bold, full, until one. E. War _ Hunt. Letters truncated, font slightly dimmer. No last name fully displayed. No full confirmation. Elise's lips tightened. She stepped inside. The attendant at the front desk smiled with distant cheer. "Welcome, ma'am. Can I see your boarding pass?" Elise handed it over. The woman scanned it, frowned briefly, then looked up. "I'm sorry, but this lounge is for Tier 1 international guests only." "I am Tier 1, Elise replied. "First class to Zurich." "Confirmed." "The system shows you as Tier 2, the woman said, eyes flicking nervously. "I believe there was a reclassification this morning." "I wasn't notified," Elise said. "Let me guess, system recalibration?" "Yes," the woman said, almost with relief. "It happens." Elise stepped back, looked at the board again. The names kept rotating. Her name was still there, still half there. An existence implied, not affirmed. A gesture of belonging, just enough to keep her from questioning. Until now. Elise pulled up her reservation email again, time-stamped and cross-verified. She showed the screen to the attendant. "Would you like to match these records with what you have?" The woman hesitated, then called a supervisor. A man appeared, mid-50s, silver tie, fake polite. He reviewed the screen, nodded slowly, then said, "We'll override the restriction, but this will be a one-time courtesy." Elise didn't respond. She walked past him, into the lounge, her shoes silent on the hardwood floor. She sat by the corner, near the frosted glass wall, where the sunlight faded into shadow. Across the room, a family laughed over cappuccinos. A man with a foreign accent took a Zoom call about commodities pricing. An elderly couple flipped through newspapers. No one looked at her. Not in hostility, but in omission. Elise wasn't just being rejected anymore. She was being rewritten, not with slurs or confrontation, but with absence. Name dimmed. Profile downgraded. Cards declined. Access rerouted. 1 degree at a time. She tapped her phone again. Still full signal. Still power. Still access to the outside world. This wasn't a blackout. It was an internal maneuver. And whoever was running it was trained enough to make it look like the system. Elise leaned back, exhaled, and watched the lounge board rotate again. Names. Welcome messages. Full profiles. Except one. Hers. The silence around her wasn't neutral anymore. It was coordinated. And somewhere, someone was watching her fade. The lounge light began to shift as the sun rose higher, casting angled beams across the floor-to-ceiling windows. Elise watched the light dance against the glass like it was measuring her patience. She had been sitting still for almost 20 minutes, not scrolling through her phone, not checking her portfolio, not replying to emails, but just thinking about the subtle, perfectly timed unraveling of her presence from this entire infrastructure. Not from the flight, from the system. That was what this was now. Not a delay, not a mistake, a removal. Not in one sweep, but in increments, tangible enough to feel, invisible enough to deny. She stood, checked her watch, and made her way back toward gate A19, careful to keep her pace steady and her face unreadable. The boarding call for first class had just started echoing through the terminal when she arrived. Passengers lined up in orderly rows, showing their passes and gliding down the jet bridge without resistance. Elise waited until the last few of Group 1 had moved forward, then approached the counter, boarding pass in hand. The same gate agent as earlier, Trent, his name tag now clearer under direct light, barely acknowledged her until she spoke. "Elise Warren, first class to Zurich. Seat 1A, she said. Trent took her boarding pass, scanned it, and then blinked. He said, the fake concern already forming in his expression. "You're not cleared for boarding yet. Give me a moment to check something." Elise remained silent. Trent tapped into his screen, frowned, then reached for his walkie. Before he could speak, the terminal speaker system crackled overhead. "Attention, passengers. Elise Warren, please report to TSA secondary screening near Gate B3. There appears to be a discrepancy with your identification documents." The words hit the air like a ripple through still water. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Elise's name, her full name, had just been broadcast across an international terminal alongside words like discrepancy and TSA. She stood there frozen for a beat, not because she was afraid, but because she understood the psychology of a moment. The public call-out wasn't a necessity. It was a tactic, one designed to isolate, to shame, to imply wrongdoing without evidence. She turned slowly, aware of the dozens of eyes now fixed on her, as if she were a suspect rather than a passenger. A man in a sports jacket stepped aside as she passed. A woman whispered into her phone. Someone lowered their newspaper just enough to stare. Elise walked toward the checkpoint again, the same route she had cleared without issue hours earlier. When she arrived, the TSA officer on duty looked mildly confused. "You're MS Warren." "Yes," Elise replied. "I was just publicly summoned here for a document discrepancy." The officer tapped into his tablet, then tilted his head. "I don't see anything. No alert. No flag." "So you didn't call me?" Elise asked. "No, ma'am," he said. "That must have been the airline." Elise exhaled once sharply. She had been pulled out of line on false pretense, using the voice of authority to strip her of credibility without needing any proof. And now she had to walk back, past the same stares, past the same whispers, carrying the burden of a lie someone else had written into the air. When she returned to the gate, the boarding area was nearly empty. Final calls echoed in the background. Trent saw her approach and gave a tight, insincere smile. "Sorry about that," he said. "Looks like it was a mix-up." "I've cleared everything," Elise said flatly. "Boarding now." Trent hesitated. "There's been a slight update," he said. Elise's jaw clenched. "What kind of update?" "Well," he said, scrolling on his screen, "since you weren't present at the final boarding check, your seat was released for reassignment. Standard policy for unconfirmed boarding status." "I was called away by you," Elise replied. "By the airline system you control." Trent nodded, feigning understanding. "Unfortunately, the system auto-flagged your status as a no-show. Seat 1A has now been filled." "By whom?" Elise asked. "Another first-class traveler whose seat wasn't confirming correctly. We had to act quickly to avoid delay," he said, almost smug. Elise didn't blink. "I have a time-stamped boarding pass," she said. "Issued. Verified. Confirmed. You reassigned it after calling me away." "The system flagged it," he repeated. "I don't make the system." Elise stepped forward. "But you feed it." A beat of silence passed between them. Trent shifted his weight. "I can offer you a seat in the main cabin premium economy aisle seat, plus a $250 voucher for the inconvenience." "Inconvenience," Elise repeated, the word hitting her throat like ash. "This isn't an inconvenience. It's a design." Trent offered a strained smile. "Just doing what the protocol requires, ma'am." Elise looked past him, toward the jet bridge where passengers were now buckling in. Somewhere down that hallway, someone else was sitting in 1A, her seat, her right, her contract, taken not by chance, but by coordinated intent. And now, the record would show she had failed to board in time. A ghost error, a silent kill, and no one in charge of the system would ever admit it was deliberate. She accepted the reprint of her new boarding pass, 32B, back of the plane, no window, no power outlet, and stepped away from the counter without another word. The buzz of background noise resumed. The whispers continued. Elise didn't react. She simply walked toward the far end of the terminal, away from the gate, away from the screen that now no longer listed her name under first class at all. And as she moved, she noticed something even more chilling. A man near a support column, not in uniform, but with a security badge barely tucked beneath his lapel, watching her too intently, too still. Elise didn't slow as she moved past the gate, past the waiting area, past the lounge windows that now felt more like reflective walls than invitations. Her fingers held tight around the reprinted boarding pass for 32B, not because she had accepted it, but because it was proof. Proof of the transfer, the switch, the signature left behind by a system that had decided she didn't belong where she paid to sit. At a customer assistance kiosk nearby, a middle-aged employee with thick eyeliner and a lanyard full of smiley face pins looked up from behind the desk as Elise approached. "Hi, how can I help?" she asked in a tone just upbeat enough to feel dismissive. Elise placed both the first class and the new economy boarding passes on the counter. My seat was reassigned without consent. I was issued 1A. After being pulled for a TSA verification I didn't request, I returned to find my profile reclassified. The employee scanned the passes, then shrugged. "Looks like it auto-updated to reflect a no-show." "I was called away by airport personnel," Elise said. "It was logged. I want the access log for the reassignment trigger." The woman let out a short laugh, the kind that sounds like it's trying to disguise discomfort. "Oh, honey, passengers don't get access to system triggers. That's internal." Elise didn't smile. "Then escalate to someone who does." The woman tapped her tablet with visible annoyance, then said, "Ma'am, I understand you're upset, but the system makes real-time changes. And most of the time, passengers lose their seats because they don't understand how things work. Especially if you're not used to first-class logic." Elise's eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you suggesting I don't understand the system I paid to access?" "Not saying that," the woman replied with a tilt of the head. "Just saying first class operates a little differently. It's not guaranteed unless you board promptly and without issue. Even if I'm removed by instruction from security?" Elise asked. The woman leaned back, unbothered. "It's all automated. Once you're flagged inactive, the seat's released. It's just how it goes." Elise stared at her. The tone wasn't malicious, it was worse. It was casual. Casual cruelty always came coded in procedure. It left fewer fingerprints. She picked up her boarding passes and stepped away without another word. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't escalate. That's what they expected, perhaps even hoped for. But Elise had been dealing with coded dismissals her entire life. When you reached her level, you didn't win by yelling. You won by listening to what wasn't being said. She sat down near a charging station in a corner row of black leather seats. Her eyes scanned the concourse. Families, solo travelers, business suits. A small child playing with a stuffed elephant. A flight crew walking in perfect formation. And just across from her, a man with rolled-up sleeves and a worn messenger bag sat quietly, his face lit by the glow of his phone. At first, she didn't think much of him. But then he looked up, met her eyes, and gave the faintest nod, like recognition, like understanding. He stood and walked over slowly, careful not to draw attention. "MS. Warren?" he asked in a low voice. Elise nodded cautiously. "Yes." "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said quickly, "but I recognized you from an investor panel last year. You presented on adaptive network mapping for aviation platforms." "I did," she said, still cautious. "Why?" "Because I work for Haven Air," he said, glancing around before lowering his voice even further. "I'm in cybersecurity. Contractual, not full-time. I was pulled in for a back-end compliance audit 2 quarters ago. My job is to monitor internal manipulation of passenger data and ensure procedural integrity." Elise didn't blink. She waited. "About 37 minutes ago," he continued, "your profile was manually tagged inside our system." "By whom?" she asked. "That I can't say," he replied. "But I can tell you what the tag was. It's a soft red flag, code 37C. It doesn't say disruptive or dangerous. It just means prioritize suppression, limit override, avoid escalation." Elise held his gaze. Which means the system won't let anyone help you. It automatically rejects tier status, flags payment methods linked to corporate accounts, and suppresses boarding validation unless manually bypassed by someone with director-level clearance. "So I've been digitally erased," Elise said quietly. He nodded. "That's why your card got declined. That's why your lounge access vanished. It wasn't a glitch. It was intentional. And it started the moment you stepped into this terminal." She sat back slightly, breath measured. "How do you know this?" "I monitored deviation reports," he said. "Your profile spiked 3 red entries in under an hour. That doesn't happen unless someone inside triggers it. And someone did." "Why are you telling me?" she asked. He hesitated. "Because I've seen this happen to other passengers. Never this precise. Never this methodical. And not one of them had your kind of digital footprint. So I figured maybe you're not the kind of person who just walks away quietly." Elise's fingers tightened around the reprinted boarding pass. "You figured right. I can't fix it," he added quickly. "But I can tell you this much. If your profile was flagged from a gate terminal, it had to be someone with supervisory clearance. Possibly higher. Probably someone you interacted with." Elise thought back. Trent. Nancy. The woman at the lounge. It wasn't just one name. It was a network. "Can you access the timestamps?" she asked. He nodded. "I already pulled a soft screen grab. I wasn't supposed to, but I did." "Send it," she said. "And stay close." The man slid his phone open, tapped a few encrypted sequences, then slipped a folded slip of paper into her palm, like a spy passing intel in a Cold War thriller. "That's my contact. If you decide to escalate this, I'm your corroboration. But if I'm asked, this never happened." Elise nodded once, her mind now racing faster than her breath would allow. She stood again, this time with a different gravity. Her posture hadn't changed, but her center of mass had shifted. No longer observing, calculating, no longer waiting, executing. Across the concourse, a group of executives in matching suits entered through a side access door marked "Authorized Only." Elise didn't move toward them. Not yet. But she watched, memorized their faces, logged their movement. Something had shifted, finally, undeniably. And this time, it wasn't being done to her. It was moving through her. The erasure had failed. She wasn't disappearing. Elise stood motionless for a few seconds, letting the man's words echo inside her mind like a perfectly pitched warning shot. The slip of paper he'd handed her remained tucked in her palm, pressed against her skin like a brand. Somewhere behind her, boarding group numbers were being called. Gate agents were coordinating logistics, and children were dragging tiny, squeaky roller bags across the tile. But Elise heard none of it. Her world had narrowed into precision. Every breath she took was now measured against the actions she was about to execute. She turned sharply, scanning the terminal until her eyes found the nearest multifunction kiosk, a sleek white column stationed near the escalators, half forgotten and rarely used except by travelers making last-minute changes or printing confirmations. Elise stepped toward it with quiet certainty, the crowd parting without needing to be asked. The screen came to life the moment she placed her hand near the sensor. She tapped Manage Reservation. The system asked for her full name, date of birth, and itinerary number. She entered them swiftly, her fingers gliding with the confidence of someone who knew the internal frameworks better than most employees here. A small loading icon spun for a moment longer than it should have. Then, instead of boarding pass, the printer beneath the screen whirred to life and ejected a crisp, cream-colored slip of paper. Thicker than usual, heavier, almost embossed. Elise pulled it from the slot, eyes narrowing slightly as she read the bold black lettering across the top. Ownership confirmation, Haven Air Class A voting shares. Her name appeared below in bold font. Unmarred by error or abbreviation, Elise Warren, 21% equity holder. Voting rights active. Executive review level 3, required for override. She stared at it for a long moment, not because she didn't expect it, but because it confirmed everything she had quietly known since the moment the system started folding in on her. She wasn't part of this airline's passenger base. She was the airline, not metaphorically, not symbolically, structurally, financially, legally, strategically. She folded the document with care and slipped it into a leather folio she withdrew from her bag, along with 2 other prepared documents: preliminary audit clauses, breach notifications, internal protocol screenshots. She turned on her heel and walked toward the gate, her stride not angry, not rushed, but final. The kind of walk that made even people not looking start to notice her without realizing why. Trent was still behind the counter, his tie slightly askew now, his voice forced into false brightness as he spoke to another passenger about compensation options for overbooking. Elise waited exactly 3 seconds after the man walked away before stepping forward. Trent looked up, and something in his expression flickered. Not fear, not yet, but the beginning of confusion. "MS. Warren," he said, in a tone that tried to sound accommodating. "Has your situation been resolved?" "Yes," Elise replied evenly. "Just now." She reached into her folio and withdrew the confirmation slip, then placed it on the counter between them. Trent's eyes dropped. They skimmed the header, then froze midline. "This," he started, "is a Class A voting shareholder credential," Elise finished. "Verified on site, with override clearance above your station, above even your direct supervisor." Trent blinked rapidly. "I wasn't made aware." "No," Elise interrupted, "you weren't. And that's the point." She placed a second document beside the first. "This is a timeline of your interactions with me since 6:40 this morning. For recorded denials of service access, 1 reclassification of my seat, and 2 incidents of system manipulation with direct impact on boarding priority." Trent swallowed visibly. "I'm sure there's been some kind of miscommunication." Elise leaned forward just slightly, voice still quiet, still sharp. "There hasn't. There's been protocol abuse masked as miscommunication. And now I need you to do something very simple." She withdrew a pen and placed it next to the paper. "Sign this acknowledgement that on today's date, you denied standard services to a passenger you believe to be of lower status, using internal tools not accessible to most of your staff." Trent didn't move. Elise tilted her head. "If you refuse, that's fine. This conversation is being logged. And unlike the boarding pass you shredded earlier, this document doesn't vanish from the system. It triggers a compliance review by the executive audit team." Trent's jaw tensed. His eyes darted to the corner of the counter, where a younger colleague was beginning to pay close attention. Elise didn't look away. "Sign it," she repeated, "or escalate. Either way, you're now in a room you can't walk out of." He reached for the pen, slowly, like it weighed more than it should. And in that moment, Elise saw the exact fracture point in his confidence. The realization that the machine he had leaned on to strip her identity wasn't just glitching. It was watching, and it remembered. Trent signed, sloppily, initialed the second line. Elise took the papers back, returned them to the folio with the same care she'd handled her ticket earlier. "This was never about my seat," she said as she zipped it shut. "It's about what happens when someone like me is mistaken for someone with no leverage." "I wasn't trying to," he started. She held up a hand, not to silence him, but to dismiss him entirely. "You don't need to say anything else. Your role in this is complete." She turned away from a counter, scanning the terminal again, not for help, but for the right vantage point. People were still moving, as they always had. But now, Elise wasn't walking among them as an anomaly. She was repositioning herself as the axis. She had allowed the system to expose itself. And now, for the first time all morning, it was about to respond. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, once quietly. She didn't check it yet. She didn't need to, because from across the atrium, a shift had begun. A new name was being whispered just above the surface noise, not in fear, but in recalibration. Elise Warren, not a passenger, a presence, not a seat holder, a shareholder. And the air around gate A19 had suddenly gone. Still, Elise didn't break stride as she left the gate desk, her folio now sealed like a surgical instrument awaiting deployment. The terminal remained in motion around her, strollers wheeling by, baristas calling out names for lattes, boarding groups echoing through the PA system. But something in the undercurrent had changed. She could feel it in the air pressure. The system that once erased her was beginning to choke on its own silence. She moved to the center of the concourse, where a tall glass panel served as both art installation and digital billboard. For the past hour, it had cycled through mundane advertisements, premium upgrades, destination teasers, flight safety protocols. But now, just as Elise looked up, the display flickered, then reset, as though prompted by a signal only she had authorized. A new slide appeared, cleaner, colder, without color. White text on deep navy. The message was direct, almost clinical in its authority. Keynote speaker Elise Warrenshire, Federal Financial Oversight Trust Strategic Shareholder, Haven Air International. Beneath the title, a short animation began to loop. A reel of Elise at international summits, panel discussions, closed-door investor forums, and high-level negotiations with faces far more recognizable than Trent Maxwell's. She wasn't introduced. She was quoted. In every frame, she moved like someone used to decision-making, not waiting. And for the first time since dawn, the terminal paused, not completely, but perceptibly. Two gate agents near the escalator glanced at the screen, then at Elise, then back again. A group of junior staff near the charging hub whispered as the reel played. An older woman in a gray scarf stopped mid-step, eyes narrowing with realization. The system hadn't simply failed to recognize Elise. It had tried to deny her existence, while forgetting she could rewrite the program. Trent was still at gate A19, issuing instructions to a trainee who now appeared visibly shaken. He didn't notice the screen at first. Not until a soft gasp from one of his colleagues made him turn. His eyes hit the board, and his posture stiffened like someone watching a classified file leak in real time. Before he could move, a voice snapped across the terminal, not over the PA, but sharp and unmistakable in the air. Stop boarding. Immediately. The order came from right, near the private corridor marked staff only. A man in a dark tailored suit stormed into view, phone in one hand, ID badge swinging wildly as he rushed across the floor. His name tag read D. Hartwell, Vice President, Global Capital Relations. His face was pale, lips drawn tight, and sweat glistened just beneath his hairline despite the air conditioning. Cease all boarding at gate A19, he barked again, this time into his comm unit. Lock down all access. Suspend transition protocols. I want the executive team in Conference Bay 3 in 5 minutes. No excuses. He reached Elise as the last few seconds of the reel continued looping above them. His eyes locked onto hers with the stunned urgency of a man realizing a fire had already reached the vault. MS. Warren, he said, almost breathless. I had no idea you were on the manifest today. You did, Elise replied, her tone free of malice, but devoid of softness. You just weren't told. There's been a misunderstanding, he began, but Elise stepped forward, cutting his sentence clean in half with the raised folio. I was classified as non-priority, flagged under 37C suppression protocol, rerouted, reassigned. Denied verified access under your system's internal override functions. All of it traceable, all of it timed. Hartwell didn't argue. He didn't even pretend to deflect. I need to see the documents, he said. Elise opened the folio without flinching and handed him the ownership confirmation first. His eyes moved fast, tracing each line like they were detonators. Then came the acknowledgement form signed by Trent. Then the internal audit clause. By the time he reached the third document, Hartwell's hands were shaking. Who else has seen this? He asked. Elise looked up at the screen, still looping her credentials behind them. The entire terminal. And now the boardroom. Because in about 45 seconds, the Zurich desk is going to receive a message from one of your bond stakeholders asking why their capital account was just frozen pending ethics review. Hartwell's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He turned away, already dialing, already motioning for security to back off, already realizing this wasn't just a crisis, it was a collapse in motion. One Elise had chosen not to trigger with anger, but with timing. A series of quiet thresholds crossed until the system had no more room to hide. Get me legal, Hartwell said into the phone. No now. I want full compliance, reports printed. And I want Trent Maxwell suspended pending internal review immediately. Somewhere near gate A22, another agent grabbed his earpiece and began whispering into it, nodding quickly as if something urgent had just rerouted their entire day. A team of 2 mid-level managers scurried past the terminal coffee shop, holding folders that had remained unopened for months until now. Elise remained still in the center of it all, the calm in the middle of a financial hurricane she hadn't summoned, but had allowed. The billboard screen froze, then shifted once more. This time, it displayed a legal disclaimer. Emergency executive review in progress, all operational decisions temporarily suspended. Passengers began murmuring, some confused, some just curious. But a few began pulling out their phones, not for distraction, but for documentation. Something bigger than a boarding delay was unfolding. Elise stepped back slightly, giving Hartwell space as he spoke rapidly into 3 different channels. His voice no longer carried authority. It carried urgency, desperation, the voice of someone who'd realized too late that a procedural humiliation had just turned into a capital risk. Behind them, one of the airline's internal security consultants moved toward the service corridor with a folder marked Priority Audit External Trigger. Elise didn't follow. She didn't need to. She had already flipped the first domino, and somewhere deep inside the airline's internal network, the remaining ones were falling. Elise took 3 measured steps back from the glass wall, allowing Vice President Hartwell the space he needed to spiral into damage control. His voice fractured across multiple devices as he tried and failed to slow the unraveling that was now fully in motion. But Elise wasn't watching him anymore, not directly. Instead, her eyes shifted downward to her phone, still tucked inside her coat pocket, still waiting. And as the LED display above her looped a 3rd time, cycling through her official titles with mechanical precision, Elise withdrew the phone and unlocked it with a single swipe, no hesitation, no wavering. Just a tap on a secure messaging app tied to a private network used exclusively by high-level stakeholders within financial oversight sectors and sovereign fund circles. And in the quiet space between breath and heartbeat, she typed just 7 words. Initiate withdrawal clause passenger discrimination breach, followed by a digital key only 3 people in. The world had clearance to verify, and then she hit send, watching the message flick into encrypted transit and vanish into the server cloud, silent, invisible, but devastating. She didn't wait for a reply. She didn't need one, because she knew what came next would move like a tidal wave, slow at first, then all-consuming. And while Hartwell was still barking into a line about mitigating exposure, a soft chime echoed from the tablet in the hands of the gate supervisor, followed by a blinking red alert she clearly wasn't trained to interpret. Her face blanching as she turned the screen toward her colleague. And just 2 gates down, another tablet chimed in unison. Then another, until a ripple of small red dots lit up across the entire concourse like the early stages of a power grid failure. Only this grid ran on capital and compliance, and someone had just pulled the main breaker, behind the scenes, but in full view of those who knew how to read institutional body language. Hartwell froze mid-sentence as his secondary phone vibrated violently in his pocket, and when he pulled it out and glanced at the screen, Elise saw the moment his spine stiffened and his mouth went dry, because he was no longer speaking to his legal team or PR handlers. He was now on the receiving end of a cascading alert from the Haven Air Joint Capital Consortium, specifically from Nexus Capital Holdings, the strategic fund with regulatory privileges tied to Haven Air's international operating credit. And in that alert was a formal notice. Withdrawal of $612 million in bonded collateral, effective immediately, triggered by breach clause 4C under passenger rights and ethics violations. And Hartwell's lips moved, trying to form a sentence, but nothing intelligible came out. Simultaneously, on a screen inside Haven Air's central control hub, the Zurich-bound flight, Elise's flight, flashed from boarding to hold for clearance, then to delayed awaiting gate review. And 2 other international departures, one to Doha, another to Sao Paulo, shifted from final call to pending regulatory recheck. And across the tarmac, radio chatter between tower and cockpit began to tighten. The kind of clipped, rehearsed confusion that said something's wrong, but no one's explaining why. And in the upper floors of the operations building, senior compliance analysts were being pulled out of routine audit meetings to answer for a sudden cascade of shareholder activity coming from entities with government-tied influence. Elise moved through the terminal now not as a passenger, but as a pressure point, and those watching her, staff, managers, even nearby travelers, felt the weight of that movement, the stillness she carried as the world around her began to glitch and fragment. Because unlike every other traveler here, Elise wasn't subject to the chain of command. She was the clause buried in the fine print, the signature that activated consequences no one ever thought would be enforced, and the system that had spent 4 hours downgrading her was now collapsing under the weight of her silence. On Wall Street, within seconds of the capital withdrawal filing, a Havenair stock monitor registered a 3.8% drop in pre-market indicators, which by itself wasn't catastrophic, until the automated trading algorithm at Belvoir and Nash registered an anomaly pattern matching language from a prior discrimination case that had triggered federal involvement, and it instantly flagged Havenair as a risk category 2A ethics-based exposure, which was immediately picked up by 2 other hedge monitors. And within 3 minutes, the ticker began falling in real time, dropping 6%, then 9.2%, and then the news alert hit the financial wires. Havenair shareholder triggers emergency clause over discriminatory protocols operational review inbound. In Washington, D.C., inside the Department of Treasury's Office of Transportation Equity Compliance, a junior analyst named Dana received the alert in her inbox and forwarded it with a red flag to her supervisor, who had been waiting for just such a notice since rumors of discriminatory targeting within travel infrastructure had started circulating earlier that quarter. And by the time the email reached the desk of the Assistant Secretary for Public Sector Accountability, a formal memo was already being drafted for a 12-hour operational freeze request to the Federal Aviation Administration, citing credible reports of procedural bias impacting international passenger treatment. And that memo was on a courier route to FAA HQ before anyone at Havenair Legal could respond to the original breach clause email. Elise walked slowly toward a panoramic window near Gate D7, looking out onto the runway, where planes sat still with blinking lights and muted engines, the noise of the terminal now carrying a strange duality, mundane on the surface, but vibrating underneath with the kind of tension only systems feel when they realize they're being watched from above, and not from a camera or a press drone, but from capital, from compliance, from the very currency that made them viable. She glanced up at one of the departure screens, watching as 3 more international flights shifted to delayed awaiting review, and a 4th dropped off the board entirely, replaced by a blank field and a blue rotating icon, while behind her, a trio of executives hurried through the corridor, holding phones to their ears and folders clutched to their sides like shields, speaking in whispers that failed to hide the panic seeping into every syllable. Back inside Havenair's internal compliance suite, a boardroom previously dormant now lit up with 6 executives seated in silence around a long table, all facing a projection of Elise Warren's profile, no longer the passenger file, but her corporate dossier, complete with voting share weight, ethics override clearance, and an updated timestamp indicating action triggered capital withdrawal active. And the only sound in the room was the flick of a remote as one of them advanced to the next slide, where a chart tracked the stock's descent in real time. The moment the internal notification hit the compliance channel, Trent Maxwell's badge deactivated. It didn't beep. It didn't flash red. It simply stopped scanning, and when he tried to re-enter the staff portal near the gate, the screen read, "Access denied, credential under investigation." He stood frozen, confused, then slowly turned toward the manager now standing beside him, holding a company-issued envelope already signed by the VP of Human Capital. "You're being placed on immediate administrative leave," the manager said without warmth. "The review is active, the footage is archived, and the audit committee is being looped in directly from HQ." Trent opened his mouth to respond, but never formed a sentence, because in that same moment, one of the passengers from earlier, the one who had been seated near Elise during her confrontation at the podium, held up a phone and calmly announced, "Too late. The whole terminal saw what you did." The video had already been uploaded. It began with Elise standing in front of the gate desk, folio open, voice steady, as she asked Trent to sign the document acknowledging his denials of service. It captured his hesitation, the pen in his hand, the exact moment he realized who she was. The camera zoomed slightly as the Havenair shareholder slide appeared overhead. Then came the punchline, added in bold letters during editing, and now pinned across millions of screens. "He just tried to erase the woman who helped build the rules." The clip traveled like wildfire, picked up by influencers, journalists, equity activists, aviation watchdogs, and quietly, by industry leaders who suddenly felt the tremor under their own foundations. It wasn't just a passenger story. It was a system story. And Elise Warren wasn't just another mistreated traveler. She was infrastructure, alive, alert, and documented. As the fallout widened, Haven Air's boardroom filled with tension, so dense it might as well have been smoke. Legal counsel recommended full cooperation. The Ethics and Equity Subcommittee released a public statement within hours. We take all allegations of discriminatory action seriously and will fully cooperate with federal regulators. Effective immediately, all personnel listed in the operational thread concerning MS. Elise Warren's profile will be removed from active duty pending third-party review. Elise never responded publicly. She didn't need to. Her silence was the statement. Meanwhile, media outlets from CNBC to Vox ran stories not about her status, but her restraint. How a woman so profoundly targeted responded not with shouting, but with execution. Not with drama, but with consequence. An NPR headline read, "Elise Warren didn't raise her voice. She raised the floor." She was already walking toward the executive exit near Terminal D, bypassing the normal concourse entirely, when a young woman in a Navy uniform caught up with her. She looked no older than 25, her blazer just slightly too big, her shoes too new, like she'd ironed her self-worth into her name tag that morning. "MS. Warren," she said, breath tight from catching up. Elise stopped, turning just slightly, raising an eyebrow. "Yes." The woman looked down, then up again. I've only been working here 3 weeks, she said softly. "I saw what happened. From check-in to the gate. I saw all of it." Elise nodded once, saying nothing. The woman hesitated, then continued. "I wasn't sure I could stay in this job, or this industry, watching how people like you are treated. I thought maybe it would never change." Elise's gaze softened slightly, not with emotion, but with awareness. The woman exhaled. "But then I saw what you did. How you didn't yell, didn't plead. You just moved the system. And I realized I can stay, because people like you are ahead of me, clearing the way." Elise didn't smile, but her eyes, just for a moment, flickered with something quieter than triumph. Maybe recognition, maybe permission. She nodded again, barely noticeable, then turned and continued walking. No applause, no press conference, no "I told you so." Just footsteps that sounded different now, not because the floor changed, but because the building had shifted to meet her stride. Behind her, the video played again on a row of terminal monitors. Passengers watched silently. No one asked for autographs. No one tried to selfie. Because Elise Warren had already given them what they came to see. The truth dressed in control, justice served without volume, power exercised without ego. By the time her driver opened the door to the car waiting outside, the FAA had issued its 12-hour freeze directive. Haven Air flights sat grounded across 8 international hubs. The Department of Transportation's preliminary report was trending before midnight. And inside the system that once tried to erase her, her name now glowed across every terminal node. Not flagged, not ghosted, confirmed. If this story challenged your expectations or left you thinking differently about power and silence, make sure to subscribe for more narratives that reveal what's often hidden in plain sight. What moment struck you the hardest, and why? Was it the turning point, the quiet resistance, or the system's collapse? Let us know in the comments. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Your voice matters here.